Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this EFT by Reuters Events webinar in partnership with Tradeshift, entitled Now or Never for Retail, Digitizing Your Supply Chain to Enhance Customer Experience. Certainly a very relevant topic at the current state of things for the industry. My name is Paddy LeCount. I'm the project director here at Reuters Events, and today I'm delighted to be joined by a great panel of experts for this particular topic. Gerry McGowan, VP of Operations and Logistics from HelloFresh US, Nick Hunt, Retail and CPG Enterprise Account Executive from Tradeshift, Erik Caldwell, the Divisional COO of Supply Chain for the Americas and Asia Pacific for XPO Logistics, and Vipul Taneja, the VP of Digital Finance from Cognizant. Great to have you all joining us today, and thank you very much for your time. I think first things first, if we start with a quick little introduction from everyone to the audience, starting with yourself, Gerry.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Gerry McGowan here with HelloFresh. Currently, I'm responsible for all of our US inbound, outbound logistics and final mile, obviously, in today's world, and dealing with the last 4 or 3 months, dealing with our increased demand, and then also just trying to make sure we can scale with all the challenges, and even the challenges right now that our carriers have. You have UPS and FedEx dealing with peak type volumes in the residential. So trying to make sure that we meet the promises of our customers has been quite challenging, to say the least.
Great, I'm sure we'll be digging into that in a little bit. Nick, a little from yourself.
Hi there, good afternoon and good morning. Yeah, my name is Nick Hunt. I'm an Enterprise Account Director for Tradeshift in Northern Europe. I'm actually looking after retail and CPG. My background is 30 years in the industry, mainly working with retail and CPG companies. And as I said, with Tradeshift, I'm looking after the retail and CPG area. A little bit about Tradeshift is that we're basically a leader in supply chain payments and marketplaces. We've been around for 10 years. We help organizations to collaborate together, to transact together. We work with about 1.5 million organizations on the network, covering 190 countries. And the network has about about $500 billion worth of transactions going through. So yeah, really pleased to be part of the panel today.
Brilliant, thank you. And Erik.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Erik Caldwell, and first of all, let me just say thank you for letting us join today. I really appreciate it. In my prior jobs, I was in your shoes. I ran supply chain for Luxottica, which is about a $10 billion retailer, LensCrafters, Sunglass Hut, Ray-Ban, Oakley, all things eyewear. And in my last role, I ran supply chain and digital operations for Hudson's Bay Company, the parent company, so Saks, Lord & Taylor, Hudson's Bay, Guild. About a third of the businesses in Europe and 25% in Canada. And then I had the chance to come to XPO, where I've been focusing on how the supply chain has evolved over the last 15 years, and how can we help provide solutions to retail customers like yourself. And I also spent 6 years in the Army prior to that, both enlisted as an officer. So if there's any questions on the Army, I can answer a few of those as well. If you're not familiar with XPO Logistics, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Supply Chain Division for Americas and Asia. Within that, XPO as a whole is a Fortune 200 global company. We have about 50,000 customers worldwide, and 2/3 of the Fortune 100 do business with us. So we're very proud of that fact that we have a really great base of customers that we care deeply about. We have about 100,000 associates across 30 countries and 1,500 sites. And Gartner's named us the last few years on the top right of the leader in the supply chain quadrant. And we've also been very proud to be recognized both transportation topics and Fortune for being a top ranked logistics company in the world. So that's some background on us. And again, thank you for letting us join today with a lot of really great companies out there.
Perfect, thank you. And last but by absolutely no means least, Vipul, a bit from yourself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Vipul Taneja. I head Cognizant's Digital Finance business unit. Quick introduction to our organization. Cognizant is a world-leading technology operations and consulting services organization. We are close to around $17 billion in terms of revenue, with pretty much a global footprint present across 60 plus countries across the globe. We work with many clients across retail, logistics, and multiple other industries to provide them solutions and services that really enable digital businesses. Supply chain and customer engagement are a big focus area for us, and I look forward to today's discussion with my co-panelists here. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much all for joining us. So let's look to get started. Just before we do, for all the audience members out there, this is intended to be an interactive discussion, so please take advantage of the opportunity to ask questions to the panelists throughout the next 45 minutes to an hour. You can do that via, funnily enough, the questions function in the software we're using here today from GoToWebinar. So let's look to kick things off then. I think Nick, if we come to you first, how does the composition of partnerships within a supply chain need to change moving forward with companies looking to engage in more digital and agile collaborations moving onwards?
Yeah, I think the key to digital collaboration now and also moving forwards into the future is really providing a scenario where there's benefits for all. If you look at the past, particularly with retailers, it's always been a case that they've tend to enforce rules upon their suppliers, and really the way in which they've moved forward is that they've treated they haven't really been fair with the supply chain. So any sort of digital approach that they've had has always been particularly, what's best for them, and not necessarily what is a balanced approach in terms of benefits for all. And one of the things we're trying to do at Tradeshift actually is to really help organizations with more of a carrot than a stick approach in terms of collaboration. So particularly now in COVID, we see some some good practices and some bad practices, and the way in which you treat your supply chain and the way in which you manage that is really key to, I think, us getting out of the current situation. So as I say, dealing with a carrot rather than a stick, and we've seen some good practices. For example, one of our clients is Morrison's, and one of the things they did from the outset is that they said they're going to pay all of their smaller suppliers immediately, and really help with their cash flow. And some of the other retailers perhaps have not been quite so good. So really the critical thing and the approach that we take and really the approach I think you should take on all digital type of projects is really, as I said, to provide value to the whole supply chain. So for example, what we're doing on our marketplace is really giving the ability for suppliers to partake free of charge, but also the fact that they then can have access to other functions, like, for example, funding. So giving retailers the ability to provide funding to their supply chain through the marketplace, that helps with cash flow. And actually, last year I was speaking to 3 big UK retailers, and one of the things that they were trying to do is to offer early payments to their vendors, but without increasing things like payment terms, and to do it at cost. So really, I think the way in which collaboration is going to work now and pretty much into the future is, as I said, having balanced benefits and not being like the lion in the jungle and dictating what happens, which has happened in the past with retailers, but really entering into a true partnership.
Sure. Vipul, true partnerships the way forward. You agree?
Look, I believe that the trick is in the words digital collaboration, right? So there are 2 components of it. One is you need the technology that is able to do this. The technology platforms that can enable flow of information from, taking an example, farmer who produces coffee beans as an example, to a consumer of coffee like me, who drinks awful lot of coffee, but has no idea where those beans are coming from which town, which farm, who's the producer, right? So that's an enabler, right? To have that platform that enables that flow of information. And we have too many disparate systems in a supply chain today that don't talk to each other. We've also seen that the challenge has been to get the front end and the back end of the of the supply chain on that same platform, right? So the small businesses, the farmers, as well as the end consumers onto that same platform. So that's the first part or first half of digital collaboration. The second half is the collaboration part, which even if you have this information flowing through the platform, it is important to share that, right? We've all been born and brought up in an environment where information is or was king, right? The more information you had, the more power you had within a supply chain. But that's an outdated mindset, and that needs to change. Because today, I genuinely believe that the competitive advantage that organizations would have is by having that real-time information flow through the entire supply chain, so that they're more agile towards addressing the changing needs of today's customers. So that's my view. You need to have both digital collaboration enabled.
Gerry, as our retailer on the panel, where do you sit with that coming out from that angle?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have for years now used the term, instead of a vendor, I've always used the term partnership, because I do believe that I don't treat them as a vendor, and I don't want a vendor just to treat me as a customer. I think because you do these contracts with different, whether it's a 3PL, final mile company, and the last thing I ever want is to have to pull the contract out. I don't want to pull it out you don't want to pull it out on me, because I'm going to make mistakes. For instance, I might miss a load that forgot to dispatch, and all of a sudden we realize that we have 1,300 boxes sitting on a yard that needed to be processed that night. And you call the vendor, and but a true partnership is when you call them and they say, hey, we'll put it into our air network and we'll get it delivered on time for you, and we just process the entire load. So they save my butt, right? But then there's times when the partner, your vendor makes a mistake. And, I'm not going to sit there and beat them up over it, because they help me. It's a two-way street. And, I think that, in true partnerships, that's what's going to happen. And especially when you look at the last 3 months, I can take a look at all of my quote unquote vendors or partners, but, there's definitely the ones that have stepped up that have been phenomenal. And, that even though my team's working 7 days a week, my partners are answering emails and texts on Saturday nights at 8 o'clock. But then there's others that literally tell us when we say we can't get a hold of you, the rep goes, oh, well, I put my phone away on Fridays at 4 o'clock. I don't like to be disturbed on the weekends. Well, that's not a partnership, you know what I mean? And that came out loud and clear with some very big name companies that are out there. So, to me, first is the partnership is extremely important. And that's how I do business. It's a handshake. It's, do you get that this person's going to be there? And then I have to respect them, and just not totally, as a retailer, I could just make their business a mess if I'm holding their drivers and not giving them good forecasts. And I want to set them up for success. Like my thing is, if I give you the perfect load on the perfect day with a perfect label, deliver it, So it's like, we have to set our partners up for success, and vice versa. We have to work together. And then with Digitize, it's really just, I think what the last 3 months has exposed on our end is that the way we thought we were doing business, isn't good enough, as far as, because of all the dynamic changes that had to be made real time. We didn't have the systems to do that necessarily. So we've been working to automate that as much as possible, so that we can be more flexible. And I think what it does is it sets us up for the future, because I don't think there's anything that we can get thrown now that we haven't been able to somehow react to in the last 3 months. And now we're building a much better foundation to be a lot more nimble going forward.
Erik, I imagine your approach to partnerships, it's music to your ears to hear it like that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, Gerry. I thought you defined the difference between partnership and vendorship very, very well. And I think we're seeing a lot more collaborative partnerships in the industry. Elon Musk had the quote, "The supply chain stuff is tricky." And I think we're seeing, and I think everyone on this call will agree, that the world is much more complex, that retail is incredibly more complex. It's across multiple channels. What we used to call omni-channel is just called retailing now, and it's just incredibly complex. The service level requirements from the customers are ridiculously higher than they were 20 years ago. And our mode of transportation is to the house versus 20 years ago is predominantly to the store. And you still have to be able to do both and wholesale. And so I think, to Gerry's point on partnership, with this complexity, you have to look at a longer term horizon for the partnership. And that longer term horizon in the digital space allows providers to do different things. It allows you to do much more integration. It allows you to do much more collaborative planning together. And it also allows you to invest in certain things such as automation or smart labor tools to plan labor better. And these longer horizons from these partnerships that can be one site or multiple sites or across geography really start to give the advantage then of the collaboration between the two companies. And I think that is one of the biggest changes we've seen as the complexity rose and the partnership has increased in response to that.
Sure. Okay, then. So if I might use your phrase of retailing as opposed to omni-channel here, retailers want to provide a unified retailing experience for their consumer, no matter where it's coming from in terms of channels. But most are not in a position internally to deliver that at the level that they think is acceptable or they want to be acceptable. Where do retailers need to focus their energies to establish a more unified network of systems within their supply chain to make that a bit more of a reality? Vipul, why don't we come to you first for this?
So look, we at Cognizant, we deal with many organizations, right? Our core business is helping support their technology and operations landscape. Problem that we come across in a majority of cases is that many organizations have grown and that growth hasn't necessarily been planned in all ways, right? So the IT infrastructure landscape becomes very complex. And that happens because there are customizations that are done to the core ERP, which create challenges, or there have been, different applications that different business units or different geographies have deployed that basically fundamentally do the same thing, but due to historical reasons have been there. Or a lot of companies have grown through acquisitions, and that brings its own systems. Now, one way is to do a large ERP upgrade, but like we all know, that requires significant capital investment, right? So what companies do is they keep kicking the can down the road and it never happens. And they learn to live with these, more outdated or legacy applications. In my view, and how I have seen some of the companies address this challenge effectively has been by looking at their technology infrastructure differently. There are really three different layers, right? So there's a system of record, which is what those ERPs are. Then there's a system of engagement, and then on top of it, there's a system of intelligence, right? So you don't need to make a lot of investment in your system of record as long as you move the system of engagement on top of it, right? So for you to bring that unified experience to your customers, to your vendors, and to your employees, you need to select the right system of engagement that can help drive that. And then wrap it around with systems of intelligence to really get that 360-degree real-time insights into your customers. That's then going to drive your business forward in a meaningful way.
And Erik, your thoughts on this requirements of providing this unified network of systems to elaborate on Vipul's points there?
Yeah, no, thank you. So we as a company have been focusing on a lot of offerings in this space to address these retail supply chain needs. And one of them is this geographic requirement of being closer to the customer base, right? So if you think about your logistics costs, by far the largest one is transportation, and then many percentage points less is in warehousing, and then the warehouse rental space itself. So if you're focusing on the transportation piece, there's a lot of cost there, which geographically getting close to the customer helps address those. The other part is this whole increase in service level needs that if you only have one distribution center in Columbus, Ohio, and I've lived in Columbus, Ohio, it's a great town, but if you only have one, it's hard to cover the entire country in a manner fast enough for the customer expectation. It's one of the things we've launched in the last couple of years is XPO Direct, where we're offered a nationwide, localized distribution network that companies can use. And it's very flexible in that sense, and it's on the same system across, so you have visibility in everywhere. The other part is our technology offering supports us with our WMX. And so we built a cloud-based warehouse management system that gives you visibility geographically across everywhere. And it's nice because it's cloud-based, so we can install this in as little as 30 days for a startup, and we've proven that. And then we built a number of tools to address the complexity of peak and labor management, which in a warehousing standpoint is the biggest cost inside the four walls of any warehouse is going to be labor and focusing on the people. And so our smart tool uses machine learning, business analytics to predict that better and allow us to much more successfully manage peaks, which is near and dear, I'm sure, to everyone on this call, as the peaks have gotten taller, they've gotten steeper, and there's typically multiple peaks throughout the year now. And then the final point is, how do you do service better, knowing that labor's been incredibly tight, the unemployment's been very low, and I suspect strongly we will return to that shortly. And I personally wouldn't bet against America. Labor's been a real challenge. And in some markets, there's a lot of competition for that labor. And so we've launched this year, we'll have thousands of robots helping to fulfill that and complement and supplement labor. But also from a service standpoint, it allows us to be 2 to 4 times faster than manual picking, depending on the solution. And from a service level, it allows us to get product out the door into the customer's house that much faster. So we've invested a lot of time on these to address these main issues of the unified omnichannel supply chain. The other part that's really risen, and I didn't feel it as much as Luxottica, but I felt it a lot at HBC, was returns. And returns now, on an average retailer, I think you're shaking your head there, appreciating that as well. It's hard. And an average retailer probably has around 20 to 25% return rate for e-commerce orders. I will tell you, on the high-end luxury side, the Saks, the Neiman Marcus's, which had experience with, the returns rate could be over 40%. Think about that for a second. Your largest inbound vendor to your warehouses is your e-commerce returns in almost all cases. So how do you effectively address that? And so we've put a lot of methodology and business process around the returns because we know it's difficult and we're trying to help customers there. The other part is, for some bigger customers, we have dedicated return centers we've built out, and we were able to cut the returns process by about half. And that allowed retailers to get product back on the shelves in season and sell those. And it also allowed to consolidate and ship from the return center as e-commerce back out to customers directly. And so we saved a lot of time, transportation, and CO2 by doing that. And so I think, with the changing landscape, we talked about a little bit on the partnership, we're constantly trying to think about what's next, what is the need of the customer, and how do we get there. And so those are some of the service offerings we've been very focused on and really excited about.
Gerry, to add your thoughts there, I suppose the return side of things for your business is not quite as bad as Neiman Marcus might be.
Zero. 0% returns, okay? But I can draw, when I was at eBay Enterprise and some of the 3PL work I've done, definitely I was, launched omnichannel for a few big major retailers. And I guess the one thing, there's kind of a couple things here. One is visibility. It's like, what's your goal? What are you trying to solve for? And, the number one thing I saw that retailers struggled with is they thought they knew where their inventory was. They thought they had all these things under control, and the reality of it is they didn't. When we were launching, example, like retailers would want to launch, let's say, pick up from store. They thought that'd be a great idea to get foot traffic in their store. The worst idea ever is when you're venturing into any type of store DC modeling is to have pickup in store, because the last thing you want is a customer to think that you have that Apple Watch or whatever it is at your store, and the customer shows up and it's not there, right? They try to find it and it's not there. So I was always trying to teach them to launch like ship from store first, because if they don't have the product, they can decline it and that can bounce to the next store, right? There's actually, so the customer gets their Apple Watch, but they don't know which, let's say, Best Buy it shipped from or something like that, right? So then, but while you're doing that, then you look at the data and say, well, why do I have all these cancellations at this one store? Well, because they just don't have good inventory controls, right? So first thing is visibility is really important. But I also caution, there is no silver bullet about bringing in new software, right? Whether you say, oh, we're going to go to Oracle or SAP, or, you know, probably the majority of the companies that make that investment, you have C-suite people thinking that, hey, this is going to solve a problem. But then the actual folks that implement usually try to bastardize the new stuff to do what they've already been doing. And they rarely want to actually adapt to change. So in doing that, change management is so important to bringing in any of those new systems and really, you know, accepting that this is a new way we have to do things, and use that visibility to hold. Then the next thing is accountability, right? Because you may have good inventory software now. You might not need anything new. You might have a decent workable WMS that gets the job done, but it's you know, garbage in, garbage out type thing. You know, where's the accountability to do what you do and do it well with what you have, and not just think that there's some silver bullet you're going to get off the cloud that's going to solve your, because it's not going to solve it unless, you know, management understands it, holds them accountable, and then implements. And when you do bring in something new, that's where you have to be constant of change management and how to really train and get people doing it right. Because then you get the visibility. If you can do all that right, and you have the visibility, your complete supply chain, your inventory, then you can do whatever you want. You can handle your returns, your outbound. But to me, like, it's getting the data correct is the most important thing in that whole world.
Absolutely. I think visibility is the perennial requirement of every supply chain logistics, well, everything really, the one you have there. I suppose, Nick, if we come to you with that as a question, you know, visibility provides the clarity for accurate and flexible decision making. What do you see as sort of the most logical opportunities or the easiest opportunities companies have to introduce more digital processes to increase data points, etc., in a way maybe that Gerry's mentioned there with change management as a key focus too?
Yeah, well, I think obviously with COVID situation, then we're seeing there's a lot of opportunities then to be looking at sort of new data points. Finding the right logistics partner is very important. And just adding on to that last string on the clicks versus bricks conversation, and a lot of organizations have been sort of trying to dip their toe in the water of providing online stuff. And it's all really, as Erik said, about fulfillment. So, as far as I'm concerned, really, the simple piece really is providing the facilities to order online. The real difficulty is actually in giving the fulfillment, and we've all experienced that in terms of when we try and place orders. It's all about getting the goods quickly. Being able to benefit from that, and if we feel that we're not getting it in the time that we expect to receive it, then we really wouldn't look at online as an option. But now, obviously, with COVID-19, that's really exacerbated the situation. We've all, to a certain extent, had to dip our foot into the online approach, but there's quite a few retailers as well that still aren't offering omni-channel, or as Erik called it, retail. And these organizations really are now looking at themselves in terms of, how are they going to survive? Are they looking at a strategy going forward? So really, I think it's all about fulfillment, having the right inventory in the right place. Being able to satisfy demand, and it isn't easy for a retailer just to turn online, because as was said earlier, it's about having the stock in the right place, and you can't just go to a shop and expect it to be there. So a critical thing for me actually is fulfillment and partnership is really critical to having this as an offering and offering omni-channel going forward.
I think leading on from there, Erik, we touched on a few things here with Nick, but what are the biggest challenges faced when for retailers When looking to establish an effective partnership with a logistics provider, as Nick alludes to, the COVID-19 has changed some of these requirements, and what's going to be considered in the future when hopefully we've moved on from this particular period. What are you seeing as those biggest challenges to creating an effective relationship?
So we talked about the visibility piece, and I like how Nick talked about COVID specifically. And it was interesting to see during the pandemic how this changed the supply chain. So initially, our customers were saying we can't get product in, we can't get parts in from Asia. And so that became a big concern, and having not just visibility to that, but be able to take action upon that and help them. If you think about our customers, 2/3 of our largest customers use multiple lines of businesses with our company, and more than half of the transportation customers use different modes within transportation. So customers who have these deeper relationships and partnerships with a larger provider gave options and opportunities to help with that first part of the COVID piece, which was getting product into the US, right? Because there was a shortage of that. The next problem was getting product through the ports and to the facilities. And then almost simultaneously while this was happening, you had a backlog of inbound coming into the US. You had stores closing, and you had the country's GDP slowing down, the growth slowing down. So now you had inbound finally here, and you didn't have the outbound demand that you had forecasted, that we had planned together on. And so we were trying to really offer customers there a solution to the inbound dilemma. And where do you put inbound containers? How do you unload containers to get, reduce trailer costs and drayage costs? How do we process that and get them into DC, knowing that the country would open back up again? And then working as a partnership side by side in COVID, we had some customers, particularly food and beverage, right, the nation's infrastructure and industrial, and also in e-commerce that went almost into a peak-like state within weeks of this period. And I would argue that the truck drivers and the warehouse workers out there became everyday heroes, and the country appreciated all that we did more than they ever have before, which is pretty proud. When you talk to your parents about that, and they realize how important the supply chain is and the role our teams play in that, and a global pandemic and the impact it has on that, how important it becomes to make sure you get toilet paper, that you have food, that you have beverages, and that you can still order online and get stuff to your house because you can't shop anymore in stores. And so there was a huge reaction from our team to do that. And then that evolved, with shutdowns for some areas, and we worked hand in hand with partners in aerospace and automotive and other areas, or in retail stores where we were closing distribution centers in lockstep with our customers as part of that partnership. And then as we're coming out of that, we plan to ramp back up with them very closely. So I think, we talk about partnership and the depth of the partnership, but I think this pandemic has really showed that. The other thing is, the entire time, I feel like we will judge ourselves on this pandemic for years to come. That how we treated our associates and how we put safety first and made that the number one priority, period, right? And then how we placed our customer needs second to the associate safety. We will be judged on this by our teams and by our relationships with our customers for years to come. And so this is a very pivotal moment of, do you act with integrity and do you move quickly? What processes do you have in place to make sure that we can protect associates? And so we've put a lot of effort and time into our operational piece. It's not just systems, it's got to be systems and leadership and a fundamental culture that Gerry talked about to be successful. And so we leveraged a lot of these processes, and we converted, our daily startup and our tier board meetings with XOS to be safety and COVID focused, deep cleaning and doing the right thing there. And then I also think our planning process with our SMART tool and our Horizon demand planning tool, working with customers on that, both for the drawdown and then for the ramp back up, was critical. And again, I think we will be judged by this for the next few years, and I'm proud of where we ended on this. And I'm sure you guys all worked tirelessly as well on this piece and making sure your people were safe and that your businesses were sustained during this period. And then the final question I have is, what's next? Right? This has been a surprising year, 2020. So try to think ahead of that as well, and leveraging that partnership and maybe doing some what if scenario planning together. Different outcomes, different things that could go on in the second half of the year. And one of those, we do a very detailed peak planning, preparedness methodology, because peak is hard, and we have a methodology that starts with some questions, and then from that we develop out the plan. So we kind of start in state back. But the same thing is going on now. We've had such increases in volume in e-commerce and food and bev. What does that mean for this Q4 in the e-commerce retail peak, and how will that change? So I would encourage everyone on this call to spend a little bit of time thinking about that and reaching out to your partners and wargaming that. What are the likely scenarios and how do we address those? So when you're in the fight, you're not trying to figure out what you're doing, you're more executing a battle plan.
Sure, and I think Vipul, if we come to you now with that in mind of thinking about Q4 and beyond, for these retailers to be more flexible for customers, to be able to manage whatever the new shifts in demand are, where in your position are the easier and more logical opportunities for companies to look to improve their digital processes or digital capabilities to help with that scenario planning as it would be moving forward?
Yeah, look, let me wear my finance hat here, right? So I believe that the easiest and most logical opportunities are on the supply side or on the payable side in a finance supply chain, right? It's interesting that a majority of the companies, want to digitize. It's logical that they want to digitize the demand side, which is where the end customers are, which is what gets the revenues in. And, that's the reason why organizations exist, and hence a lot of capital goes there. But, in our experience, we've seen that the return on investment that you can get on the supply side is very significant and can't be ignored, right? So the opportunities there are immense. And going back to the conversation we just had in terms of the current environment, as COVID set in and businesses, offices started shutting down, we saw a lot of vendors becoming nervous in terms of whether their invoices would get paid. A lot of manual documents were being sent, invoices, for example, to scanning centers, and those scanning centers were not open, right? So how do they make sure that they get their invoices paid on time? We had some huge challenges with a number of customers in terms of managing that. So the vendors are very willing to move digitally onto their processes, because now they see more and more the value of them being able to do that, right? For them to get visibility into their financials, into the supply chain, and so on. And for a company, it also helps managing your working capital better, right? The spend or cost management. Once you know where your spend is, you can see where you need to focus on, and that's so important in today's environment. And lastly, once, by focusing on the supply side and, really understanding where your products are being sourced from, my example of those coffee beans before, where those coffee beans are coming from, it can also help drive better sustainability in the supply chain as well. So, that's where I think the need of the hour is, to make sure that you have a better visibility and make the investments on the supply side.
That brings us quite nicely onto a question specifically around sustainability and the impact that an increasingly digitized supply chain could have for retailers and logistics providers on their overall environmental or sustainability goals as a business. Gerry, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, gosh, there's many angles that when we look at sustainability. First is especially on the logistics side. Our packaging, what we're doing as far as packaging, everything's recyclable. We look at our supply chain in what we do is we feel we're one of the most sustainable businesses and ways to get food, right? If you look at the typical shopper who goes to their big box grocery store, if you look at the path that food took to get there, right? And the amount of carbon footprint that was used from the grower to some type of cross dock to trains to this to then into then it gets to a retail location, and the consumers have to drive and pick it up. When you take a look at the carbon footprint we're called of just going to buy your food compared to what we do, it's an incredibly much more sustainable way to eat and to eat better food. We go right from manufacturer right to our DC, right to your doorstep, and you never had to get in your car. And so, and then our logistics suppliers we use, we try to make sure that we're doing the best we can. And for the most part, because they're trying to meet their sustainability goals, like for instance, for me as a shipper, it's easy to be Smart Waste certified because all my, logistics partners are Smart Waste certified as actual carriers, so as a shipper, I use them and that goes in. But when you just look at the footprint of home meal delivery, like, and with all the ingredients coming, it's so much more sustainable product and vertical to be in. So on that end, we feel as a business, we're leading the way in sustainability and food. Then second to that is, okay, what do we do as an organization to be sustainable within our buildings? Are we LEED certified? What can we do for packaging, recycle packaging? Taking a look at maybe actually having some type of boxes that can be used more than once. So there's a lot of those things we're exploring from just, our output side. But again, when you talk sustainability into the actual vertical in this business, sending meal kits to the house, it just blows away the traditional, supply chain of food.
And Erik, obviously, myriad different types of industries in terms of retailers that you'll be working with. Same question to you in terms of this increasingly digitized supply chains, the impact that can have on your sustainability, the outputs.
Yeah, and there's a couple parts to this. I mean, the first is the four walls of the warehouses themselves, the geographic footprint and the transportation impact, and then finally the forecasting and product usage. So when I look at the four walls, about a third of all product we were able to recycle last year, and about 99.5% of everything we have is not hazardous, right? And so obviously that 0.5 we have to take very seriously for the hazardous piece. But the majority that we produce or that we work with customers on is non-hazardous, and we're able to recycle a large portion of that. When you look at the electricity piece, this year in Europe, we're going to have 75% of our sites with smart LED lighting. And smart LED lighting, I mean, LED compared to traditional, incandescent or fluorescent bulbs is remarkably more efficient, but smart LED is about 75% more efficient. And so we're converting a number of sites to that. We've got 55 sites we've retrofitted recently to the new LED. And we want to get even more to that smart LED over time. So 95% of our facilities last year reduced their energy footprint, which is exciting. And that translated about an 18% reduction in our overall energy usage. So we're excited about that. And I think there's a lot of lessons out here that other warehouse providers or other retailers with warehouses are doing here, to save the energy and help the environment. The next part is really around transportation. Which has a larger carbon footprint than warehousing typically. And so I think we're seeing the proximity closer to customers is reducing transportation. And the really cool thing about the environment and the costs is they're not in conflict here. Typically the CO2 usage and the dollars per pound are almost exactly correlated, very, very strongly correlated. And so by reducing the environmental impact, you're actually helping your company save money. And then being geographically closer to customers helps on the service time. So it's a very virtuous cycle in that sense. And the final piece is we've built a team doing demand planning. So we work with all customers, obviously, on demand planning with them. But we have a dedicated team that uses our proprietary Horizons tool. And we were able to reduce error in forecasting by about half. And this is exciting because we do this with some really big retailers, chip makers, aerospace, automotive customers, and personal technology as well. And so we're able to help reduce the inventory error, put that product closer to where the need's going to be. And so from an environmental standpoint, we have a lot less waste, right? So you reduce the error, you reduce the spoilage or the carryover, you reduce the markdowns. And that has a big environmental impact too by just being more efficient on the front end of the planning cycle. So I think those are the three things we've been mainly focused on. And I think the numbers have been really impressive, and we're excited about what we're doing that. On the other side, too, on environmental safety and environmental tend to go half and half. Our safety record the last couple of years has been at less than a quarter of the industries. We've cut it by another third last year. And so I think, if you're focused on safety, naturally you focus on the environmental piece hand in hand with that. And those programs tend to go very closely together.
Sure. And Nick, when we maybe take this conversation a bit wider, what do you see by way of reducing inefficiencies, be them waste reduction or even cost savings in processes? What are the key advantages and the biggest challenges of creating a more accurate picture of a sourcing network if we sort of look backwards in the supply chain process here?
Yeah, so one of the we did a survey actually last year with IDG, and it was across retailers, big retailers all across Europe actually, and we found that 51% of these retailers were still receiving paper invoices from their suppliers. And obviously now as we've entered into the COVID situation, a bit like Vipul said earlier, is that we're finding that organizations are no longer able to process paper. Shared service centers are either having to close down or work from home. So one of the benefits of having a digitized supply chain is the fact that you reduce the paper and you have the ability to work from whatever location is suitable for them in a controlled manner. And we're finding that even though transactions globally through the Tradeshift network have dropped year on year, it's down 10% actually. The people on the network can still process those transactions effectively. And it's not also about things like sustainability when we're talking about paper, but also corporate social responsibility as well. So having a supply chain digitized and appearing on our network allows people like retailers to actually delve down into their supply chain. For example, we have an app that sits on Tradeshift called Freedom, and what it does is it analyzes whether there's any forced labor in the supply chain. And recently there's been some situations where retailers have been embarrassed, consumer goods companies have been embarrassed because all of a sudden somewhere embedded in the supply chain there's sort of forced labor or there's issues. So it's not just about increased collaboration, but it's also visibility in the supply chain. So digitizing that, having that available to access, have suppliers to update their own information. And to get visibility of, for example, their own invoices. A lot of time within organizations, particularly in AP departments, is answering queries from suppliers. Where's my invoice? Has it been paid? Has it been approved? So just having that visibility available to them to access and digitizing the whole supply chain really provides tremendous value for everybody on the supply chain, actually.
And Vipul, sort of building on that, where are you seeing that most retailers or businesses in general maybe are failing when it comes to their digital transformations or not achieving to the point that they should be? What sort of changes can they make in their processes to improve success percentage of new digital initiatives? We spoke earlier about change management and that sort of things, but yeah, what are other areas that you think they need to be focusing on to ultimately troubleshoot on a successful initiative being applied?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is, first is data. More often than not, we see that a lot of investments are made in new technology, new processes, but the inefficiencies of a legacy system gets passed on to a new system because of bad quality data. Right, the data is not cleansed. And getting the right data strategy, the right data management practices is absolutely essential as you make those investments and to get the returns that you're expecting out of your technology investments. The second aspect is collaboration. And that collaboration is going back to the change management topic. It's within the business units, as well as it is between the supply chain actors, right? So many times you've seen that, for example, a new accounts payable system is being implemented, but the implementation is not effective because the procurement department is not prioritizing it enough and playing the enabling role that is needed for them to get the vendors onto the platform, as an example, right? And I'm sure Nick will recognize that and would have seen that in multiple projects as well. So I think those collaboration between those departments is so very important, as well as the collaboration between a logistics provider. That's so very important for us to get that end-to-end visibility into our supply chain.
Sure, and I think seeing as we're coming up towards the end of our time here, so we'll take a question from the audience now that I think we've touched on earlier, and we've looked at a few areas, but might be to the point quite well here. Maybe if we start with yourself on answering this, Gerry, but the question is that everyone, and we've talked about in this panel, agrees that the flow of accurate data and is key in communications throughout the supply chain. But one challenge, which we referenced earlier, and I don't expect anyone to have the answer to this, but it'll be interesting to see what you think. One of the biggest challenges is overcoming how your different partners, be them tech providers or 3PL partners, are all operating using independent tools that don't always talk to each other. There's a lot of miscommunication there. What can you see as ways that we can mitigate that lack of communication or improve it?
Yeah, like you say, there's no one silver bullet. You know, you're not going to go to one all-encompassing way. I think really just the key is to make sure that the pipelines that you have with each of them are the right pipelines. You know, you're definitely going to connect. I'm going to connect with maybe carriers differently when it comes to tracking and how I serve that up to my customers, for instance, right? You know, I want it to be, you know, one seamless experience for the customer. Yet I use 10 different carriers, you know, between regionals and nationals. So, you know, that's a challenge in itself to serve that up in that way. I'm not going to change that. You know, you're not going to change how how FedEx does tracking or how UPS does tracking. If somebody thinks they can change them, you know, good luck, right? You know, they have their legacy systems and stuff. So the key, I think, is like you said, and this goes back to, I think, just really partnership and working with partners that, you know, have even some of the smaller companies. You know, I'm very impressed how dynamic and nimble they are when we say, hey, can you make a change to this? Can you make this look different? And they're like, yeah, and within 48 hours, they make a change for you, or maybe even shorter, right? So I think in selecting partners, like when I select vendors to do work with and become a eventual partner of mine, you know, when I kick the tires and vet them out, I want to understand not just how they run their call centers, not just how they run their warehouses, but how is their technology? How do they invest? How much do they invest in technology? Is their technology onshore versus offshore? You know, you can debate the benefits there. I think, you know, kind of onshore makes things happen a little quicker, you know. But, you know, all those things I think are really important. Again, you're not going to have everybody communicate on one thing, but it's really driving that when you do select those partnerships, you are selecting the ones that the technology side matches up well with, you know. And then when I vet out a partner, I bring my technology, my head architect guy in. Hey, what do you think about them? What do you think about how they're structured? Because I'm gonna, you know, from an ops side, I want features, functionality, right? But I don't have the expertise to look under the hood to say, well, that platform is crap or something like that, right? So that's where my partners I bring in, my coworkers that are experts in that, saying, hey, take a look, what do you think, before we make like a final decision. And once you do that, if you've done your due diligence up front, then everything else, you know, yeah, there could be misses in communication, but that's just the normal bumps in the road that you just got to get smoothed out. You know, you get on a call, figure it out, get the right people, and solve the problem. But I just think it's really how you work with and communicate to your partners. At that point, then I think those things come individually, and at the end of the day, the whole system works because you've done those pipelines individually.
Nick, additional thoughts there? In agreement? Any other areas that you would focus on?
Yeah, well, as Tradeshift, our mission is to try and digitally connect every organization in the world. Yeah, we got to admit that's a stretch, but from the outset, what we try to do is to make e-commerce available to all. So by having a platform which allows access in multiple ways, is very open, and really can be used alongside ERP platforms that companies have invested in. So that's our approach, actually, is to try through our openness and through our ability to connect up to lots of disparate systems, is to have one to be the connector that can be used between multiple organizations. And really, as I said right at the very beginning, is to balance the benefit for all. So allow collaboration, but also allow organizations to utilize the technology which best suits their business, but use us really as something that can connect up to different businesses.
And Vipul, yourself on that?
Yeah, I think covered all the major points there. I think it's it's extremely important for us to get the right fundamentals in place so that we have. There are now some of these industry-wide platforms that are available. The more companies that are able to and willing to adapt those, I see a better flow of information and so on. So I think we are moving there. There is no one solution, but as things progress, I believe we would have those fundamentals in place to be able to get the supply chain and the real-time information that is really needed.
And Erik, perhaps a final thought for you on this as one of those partners who historically is using a different tool, as this person asks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, our internal tool gives us visibility across, but a lot of our customers have multiple providers. And I guess my suggestion from my retail days, visibility is key, but the visibility itself is just informing you. It's the actions you can take from that really make the difference. And so building around, what does that visibility give you? And the only other final thought I had is just the flexibility, right? In peak periods, different transportation providers, have different demands. And having some flexibility to be able to transition between carriers or between transportation, carriers, parcel carriers, is critical during peak as well. So that's the final thought on this, just having some flexibility with your systems and try not to hard code them, but allow you to make choices real time based on the visibility you're getting.
Perfect. A very good place, I think, to conclude the conversation today. An hour does fly by, doesn't it? Gentlemen, a really big thank you to yourself, Gerry, Nick, Erik, and Vipul. I appreciate all of your insights today. I hope the audience have too. We will look to get these questions out to our network as well that we didn't manage to get to, so we can share those out and hopefully people can share ideas off the back of that. But apart from that, I hope to join you for the next webinar that we host here at Reuters Events. But until then, have a really safe evening and we'll catch up soon.
See you guys. Cheers.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you guys.